So set your flux capacitors back, and here we go. Go back to the places you used to frequent. Go back to them and find that something is missing. Something small or hard to notice. Something like fresh carpet or a burnt out neon sign. Or maybe they tore it down. Maybe your favorite person, the one who kept you coming back, is suddenly gone. Maybe it just seems smaller. Maybe, just maybe, the thing that's missing is you. The old you. The you who used to go there in the first place. I was home on Long Island between reading tours and decided to stop by the bookstore where I used to work, which is something I never do. At this juncture in my life, I've had 30-something jobs, and no matter what the job entailed, it was never the normal people who came back to visit. It was the emotionally disturbed ghosts rattling around the old haunt, asking who still worked there, stuck on this mortal plane in a developmental purgatory. It's because of these twitching, transparent specters of retail that not visiting old jobs has become part of my psychological code. A rolling stone grows no moss, and a person who doesn't look back never becomes a lonely bag of bones, popping in to ask who the manager is. But I was late for a birthday party and needed a card, and I just so happened to have copies of my comic books to give away. "How's it going?" I said to the cashier, putting my stuff on the counter. "Can you give these to Sam and Patricia?" I worked at the bookstore for a long time, but nowhere near as long as Sam and Patricia. They'd been working there for so long it was impossible to imagine them in any other environment. Patricia, with a rat tail snaking down the length of her back, gigantic cannonball-sized breasts and shirts with wolves on them she wore without the slightest touch of ironic intent. And Sam, with an arm that ended at the elbow, betrayed new employees by making them bring up copies of The One-Armed Chef and the Amy Mann album, The Forgotten Arm. These women were the wallpaper of border store number 79. They were unchanging in their ways, steadfast in their work habits, and by far the most efficient workers among us. And I did everything in my power to wrangle an invite to hang out with them. "Patricia," I said, twirling the rat tail I had let a friend chop into my hair, "I'm growing one too. Now can I join your pool league?" Patricia laughed, adjusting her mammoth bra. "Maybe," she said, and then turned around to continue shelving a cart of soup grafting books. We never did get to hang out, and it was years since I worked at the bookstore, but I was sure if anyone would appreciate the paper trail of toner and Xerox stories I was mailing across the country, it would be those women. The cashier bagged my purchase and scanned my membership discount. The company restructured and they eliminated both of their positions. I think Sam works at a bank now. I don't know where Patricia went." I must have looked gut-shot. "I'm really sorry." It's difficult to imagine old friends in new settings. Sam sending deposit slips along with a vacuum tube in the teller window of the credit union, or Patricia in anything other than a t-shirt bearing the words New Mexico and a pair of stained jeans. There's an alternate reality where they move on to value, realize their true potential, and find a happiness that doesn't involve the monotony of sorting true crime novels. Maybe they never imagined me with my shit together, remembering a family member's birthday, or at least with a normal haircut. But what do I know? I'm just a ghost. Dave worked at Barnes & Noble and I worked at Borders. "It's like we're spy versus spy," he whispered, his voice muffled so as not to wake his parents in the next room. "I know," I said, sitting in the living room at my parents' house in flannel pajamas and Dave's gimme shelter shirt. "Tell me your secrets, join our side." Our relationship lasted 3 years, which for me was my whole life, an eternity in a time capsule of angry young freedom and the feeling of college being a relentless labyrinth of failure. Both of us lived at home and both of us were light years away from graduation being even a distant possibility. So instead, we made each other laugh until our ribs felt broken and late for class so often I was on academic morning 3 times. Before Dave landed the job at Barnes & Noble, he worked at Tower Records with the rest of our friends. The dress code there was somewhere in the range of laissez-faire to obscene. It wasn't uncommon to see cradle-of-filth shirts with crucified animals or naked women, the uncensored wardrobe of true liberty coming in increments of $5.35 an hour. When Dave started at Barnes & Noble, he was stressed because his only work-appropriate shirt with a collar had a cigarette burn in the pocket. I, on the other hand, had no dress code to abide by, although I had recently gotten in trouble for wearing a pair of child's gun holsters from the 1950s to work. If how you dress for your job provides the basis for the way people see you, then I was an eagle flying boldly over the Rockies, a gunslinger, unbound by the obligations of collars or pleated pants. Barnes & Noble's just more sophisticated, he said. We wear nice clothing so that our clientele will respect our choices. Screw your clientele, I said. The degenerates that come into Borders love us because we're diverse. That was my argument. Barnes & Noble employees were like pleated khakis folded neatly into the drawer of someone on 10 different kinds of antipsychotic meds. But Borders employees were the antipsychotic meds, pills and tablets in many different colors, all with unique and very important purposes. Dave and I never tired of putting down each other's employer. None of it mattered much anyway. It was the customers we agreed we hated. Somebody cracked in front of the water fountain today, I said, whispering into the phone on my break. Who does that? Who? At my job, they don't ever flush, said Dave on the other end of the line. I think it's a weird attention thing, like the way flashers just get off by you reacting. They're like animals, these people. One of the plagues of retail is the regular customer. The only thing regular about them is that they are regularly there, messing up what you just fixed, arguing with the manager over coupons and leering at the teenage baristas. Otherwise, they are usually exceptionally irritating and extraordinarily unattractive. Fortunately for me, the only thing my store did to encourage loitering was put in a cafe. Dave's store actually hosted events, which always resulted in housebound freakazoids coming out in droves. There's a poetry event, Dave said quietly, his voice sapped of all patience. This metal dude is reading sexy poems about his lazy-eyed girlfriend that obviously allude to doing it. Like how? I asked. He mentioned putting his sword in her stone. It's like Iron Maiden lyrics, but horrible. I didn't like regulars when they were an interruption of my workday. But if they were the bane of someone else's existence, then it fell into the category of people watching and was therefore all right. The poetry reading was only held once a month, so I had plenty of time to request the night work off and leaf through anything I had that might be worth reading. I brought a few pieces with me, but settled on a short story I wrote about judging mustaches based on black and white movies I watched with my grandma. It was a surefire crowd pleaser, and I was excited by the opportunity to take a field trip to Dave's miserable obligation. Maybe my presence alone could turn what was previously 11 steps short of an AA meeting into an inspirational scene from the Dead Poets Society. Hi, my name is Matthew. For those of you new faces joining us this evening, I'm the host of tonight's event, the monthly reading of the Queen's Poetry Society. Matthew looked directly into my fresh new face when he introduced himself. He had a horseshoe of brown hair that looked like the hook end of a Velcro strip, as well as a goatee, the facial hair of choice for the recently divorced. I'm going to get this reading going in a minute, the sign-up sheet's being passed around, but first, Carl, did you want to say a few words? There were 30 chairs out for a handful of people. I chose a seat in the back row, the instinct of a wannabe bad kid. Dave was working that night, listening in spite of himself over the low feedback of the store PA. An old man stood up in front and hobbled over to the microphone. Carl looked like a live-action Montgomery Burns with the decayed purple head spot of Mikhail Gorbachev. He wore enormous glasses that magnified his eyes and a look of disgust on his face as though he was perpetually sniffing an eggy fart. I started this club 40 years ago, he said. Then he hobbled right back to his folding chair and fell asleep. All right, said Matthew. That was great, Carl. Now we're going to have our first reader, me. This poem is called My Smiling Daughters Are Like My Grandmother's Hands. I didn't really understand the comparison, but I did glean that he was indeed recently divorced, and his daughter's smiles were all he had to keep from offing himself. When he was done, Michael called him the first reader. Angelina's been coming to the poetry workshop on Wednesdays. Her poems just keep getting better by the day. Come on up, Angelina. Angelina Irina was a mousy 30-something with huge wire-frame glasses and a frosted perm. She read with a stutter that made her difficult to understand, but The Untouched Lotus was clearly a poem about her sexual wish list. It was both disgusting to imagine and poorly written. I wondered if Matthew would try to tap that, but when I looked at Dave and telepathically communicated my thoughts, he shook his head as solid negative. I looked around at the crowd. There was Carl, our ancient founder, slumped over and possibly dead. Another old man with a white mustache and a ponytail, metal dude, the damsel in optometry distress, 2 middle-aged women, a teenage girl, and me. I closed my eyes and thought about starting a band with all of them. Sort of a polyphonic spree meets the kids of Whitney High. I would sing, metal dude would shred on bass, Carl would robot in one of those light-up jumpsuits that Daft Punk wears. Then we'd all climb in the tour bus, do lines of Low, and roll on to the next city like a Bob Seger song. Okay, next up we've got one of our new faces this evening, Cassie. Come on down. I shuffled my papers, still thinking about the Partridge Family I wanted to be a part of, and walked to the podium. Hey, I'm Cassie, and this is a story about mustaches. I was in the presence of 3 mustaches, 4 if you count the middle-aged woman who was between waxes. The story went over as I thought of it, with chuckles where there should be chuckles and sighs where there should be sighs. They applauded, and I took my seat. Wow, said Matthew, that was really great. We don't often get short stories up here, but that was something else. Thank you. All right. I felt like my mission had been successfully completed. Our host looked down at the sign-up sheet. Okay, next we've got Ned Diller. Ned, if you want to take the podium. The old man with the white, straggly, beatnik ponytail got up from his chair. Ned Diller was probably 75 years old. He had the kind of mustache you could tell he'd been growing since day 1 of puberty. The kind that would make your kids cry if you ever shaved it because Daddy's face looks weird. He wasn't feeble like Carl, who had one hand gripping the angel of death just to stand upright. Ned Diller walked to the podium confident and poised, but grabbed the microphone by cupping it like it contained lightning bugs and sending a shriek of feedback through the storm. Poetry indeed, he began, glaring at me like I was in a police lineup for snatching his purse. The poem I'm reading today is a winter poem. It's called White Frost on Tree Branches. I was hoping for some finger snapping or Ginsberg, but Ned's poem was a saccharine imagery of a nursing home Christmas card. It was the sort of thing you would expect from someone his age, but certainly not from someone his age with a ponytail. Thanks, Ned, that was great. Well, if none of you has anything else to read, I guess we can wrap it up. Thanks for coming out this evening. Next month's meeting will be, as always, first Monday of the month, workshop on Wednesdays. See y'all then. With the meeting adjourned, I walked off to go find Dave to give him my review of the evening's events and to see if he wanted to get dinner. I was looking down the romance aisle when somebody punched me hard in the arm. Instinctively, I spun around with my fist clenched, ready to knock out whoever had hit me. Surprisingly, I found myself face to face with Ned Diller. Was that a poem? He asked, wily brows knitted in anger. What? This really caught me off guard. By that time in my life, I'd been in several fistfights, but never until that point had I thought about striking someone so elderly. I said, was that a poem? I don't know. I guess it was sort of a poetic essay. I said Ned Diller, wringing his papery hands. Was that a poem? No, it wasn't. Well, young lady, this is a poetry reading. That was enough. I barely had the patience to deal with the contentious regulars at my own job, let alone in my leisure time at other people's jobs. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you the poetry police? Ned's face purpled with anger. I'm not saying I'm the poetry police. I'm saying that this is a poetry reading and it should stay that way. Well then, why don't you arrest me, poetry police? I held out my wrist limply, begging his arrest. In my day, young women had respect for their elders, but in my day, old men kept their opinions to themselves. Good day, young lady. Good night, old man. Ned stormed through the cooking aisle and back up the escalator. I turned around and Dave was looking over a May of romance shelves. Did I just hear you ask him if he was the poetry police? I had a month to prepare for the next reading. I wrote a poem I was sure was perfect, the ultimate slam, an in-your-face diss to the senior citizen who would punch me in the arm. You're really getting way too into this, Dave said. Maybe you should do your statistics homework instead. No, Dave, I said, sitting with my feet on my parents' coffee table. There is no statistics homework in war. 4 weeks later, the day of reckoning was upon us, but Ned Diller wasn't there. Angelina read something pathetic and sexual. An old woman read a poem about leaves. Matthew read something about when he met his wife. I waited, a predator. A snake in the grass among the empty chairs in the basement level of Barnes & Noble. I looked to Dave where he stood at the music counter, shaking his head at me, and then to the escalator. Ned Diller rode down, confident, regal, self-assured in a way that someone who thinks winter frost makes for a good poem should not be. I've been waiting all month for this, he said. Then he handed me a paper and took a seat. It was a Peanuts comic about a disagreement between Charlie Brown and Snoopy. He had scanned it into Microsoft Paint and put word bubbles over the dialogue to where Snoopy was now shouting, "Poetry police!" Next up we have Cassie. She's a real spark plug and I hope she becomes one of our regulars. Come on up, Cassie. I took the podium and looked at Dave, who was still shaking his head. I breathed deeply and began my poem. A scathing 4-pager about Ned Diller's funeral, written in the alternate universe where he suffered cardiac arrest after lecturing me for his expert opinion about what a poem should be. When I finished, I looked up. Dave's mouth had formed an O-ring of horror. Carl actually woke up for my reading and elbowed Ned. And Ned, well, he looked the same. Painful, smug, but I sensed he might be a little wounded on the inside. Well, said Matthew. Thank you, Cassie. I think we all really needed that. Well, I guess that's about all the time we have for this week. Thanks to everyone for coming down. Same time, same place next month. And so it went. My desire to bombard myself with bad poetry eventually ran its course, and I guess Dave and I did too. There's also a suspension of principles that has to take place in order to become a regular when you hate that sort of thing. I decided I was into being irregular, spontaneous, on the go. But last spring, I happened to be home on the first Monday of the month and suspended my principles long enough to end up in the basement of the Barnes & Noble in Queens. Ned's going to start off the evening for us, Matthew said, handing over the microphone. Ned, as old as he was, you could still tell he was mean. He was a little weaker, but his ponytail was still as sleek as I'm sure Seabiscuit looked in his heyday. He put on his reading glasses. This poem, he began, is called The Empty Chair. It was the same boring, every last word rhymes fare I was used to from Ned. But then I noticed Carl wasn't there, holding it down from the land of Nod in the front row. Oh God, not Carl. Thank you, Ned. That was beautiful. Our next reader, well, some people are like favorite songs. You think about them sometimes, then they come on the radio and it just brightens your day. Cassie's one of those readers. What do you have to share with us tonight, Cassie? Matthew was right. People are like songs on the radio, playing somewhere invisibly when you're not around on a wavelength you can't hear. Then, one day if you're lucky, you tune in at the right moment and hear them for one last time. Haven't seen you in a while, Ned said, shaking my hand. Haven't seen you either. Thanks, guys.